Rohan, if you change some layers and tried some different things, you can create a pull request like stating what findings did you what results did you get.
So Rohan, are you familiar with GitHub?
ये सब गिटहब तो पता है।
हाँ, तो
मतलब
उससे
नॉर्मल
मतलब
ऐसे देख रहे थे, हम सोचे थे डायरेक्ट
हाँ हाँ
अगर कुछ कुछ बनाएंगे तो सीधा मतलब प्रोजेक्ट में उसी पे मतलब उस प्रोजेक्ट में ही शो कर देंगे।
अच्छा अच्छा
लोकल कंप्यूटर पे कर रहे थे इसलिए।
कोई
ठीक।
ऐसा है जिसे गिटहब भी नहीं पता है, कमेंट कर दो यार, वी कैन टेक अ सेशन ऑन गिटहब को।
हम लोग गिटहब का सेशन हुआ है, दो दो हो चुका है।
हाँ
नहीं
शायद,
मतलब अभी
शायद हाँ अभी भी
फिर
किसी को
से।
नहीं आता हो तो
हाँ, ओके।
करवाना पड़ेगा दोबारा से।
ठीक है, उसका अलग से सेशन लेंगे। ठीक। Okay then. So let me start with today's session. So in the last session, we just looked at some basics about image processing. So how you read an image, how do you make the color change from RGB to just black and white, and then we looked at how RGB images are represented in memory, and we call each of these channels, and like we looked at how we can individually vary the opacity and other changes as well, and we discussed how what is a convolution, what are filters, and how does how do different filters work, and like what type of effect they have on images. Like then we took at some examples like blur, outline, and sharpen, and so on. And then the next part we looked at polling. So polling, we saw what are the different kinds of polling, what is the use of polling, and finally we just got a basic idea of what is a convolution layer, and what exactly happens in a convolution layer, and how is a CNN how the number of input features, and how do you find the shape of an image after using a convolution with a proper filter. So and then uh, so did anyone look up what is padding in an image? Yeah, so if you guys have any doubts here, so you can put it on the chat, or you can just unmute and ask. Yeah, which is correct.
I think doubts नहीं है अभी, तो आगे बढ़ जाओ.
Okay, so then it's good that if you have looked about padding, and so now we have done the basics of how a convolution works and everything. So we'll look at specifically convolution layers, convolution neural networks, and how they are implemented in TensorFlow, different ways in which they are implemented, and we'll go through an example of how to do it. So, firstly, I'm just importing some things. I'll explain in detail what these imports are. So, what we're doing today is similar to the first session which we took. So, we have some images from a data set called CIFAR. So, you can take a look at the data here. So, let me just show you what the data is. So there are like about 10 classes, so different images of 10 classes, like an aeroplane, automobile, bird, etc. And again the task is classification, as we did with the same thing in the first thing. But the main thing is during the first session we didn't use a CNN, and today we'll use a CNN and do the classification. So firstly what I'm doing is I am using so there the CIFAR data is can be loaded directly from TensorFlow, and it's much faster this way. But if you want, you could also download the dataset from here and individually load it. I feel that this is very neat because you can just load the data in one line. And when the first time you do this, it downloads the data. Since I've already downloaded the data, it doesn't show the data to me. So after downloading this, I have split the data into train and test. So as you may know, like this data is what we use to train the model, and this is something which we'll use to test accuracy of the model. So, and you can see that I've printed the shapes here. So like we explained, the 50,000 here stands for the number of images, and the rest of the part stands for what is the dimension of the image. So 32 by 32 is the width and height, and 3 is for the RGB, so one for each channel. And similarly, you can see that for test data size is 10,000. So there are 10,000 images, and the image size remains the same. So I'm just plotting a random image from the dataset. So this doesn't seem like, no, I'm not able to see any image. So this, if you can see, it looks something like a bird, right? So this is like a bird, and we can look at some more examples. Just a minute. So, yeah, so this approximately you can say that it is a frog. Okay. So we'll continue from here. And so what happens is, let me just show you how the data looks like once I read it. Yeah. So if you look at the y values is just for each image there is just a number associated with it, and the number would be the class of the image. So so for example, 6 denotes some class and 0 denotes some class. So since there are 10 classes, all the values would lie between 0 and 9. Okay. But what we have to do here is, when we are loading it into the TensorFlow, we can't use this data directly. So what we do is we apply a technique known as one-hot encoding, where basically what happens is, let's say for example, your data has some values like this, right? Say red, blue, green, and blue, and so on. So assuming that we have only 3 classes, what we can do is, for each ID, that is for each image, we can create a vector where it is basically a Boolean vector. So it would be 1 if the class matches the current class, or 0 otherwise. So if you can see, so there's, for red there is 1 under color red and 0 among others, and similarly for blue there's 1 at the blue position and 0 elsewhere. So uh, could everyone understand this? Any doubts until now? Okay. Yeah. So it's quite straightforward, I would say. So you don't need to write the code for this as well. So you can, there is this function called tf.onehot under TensorFlow. So what you can do is, you can just pass in the values, and it would directly make a one-hot encoding vector. And here we pass in the number of classes, because or else TensorFlow does not know how many classes are there in the data, right? So once we are done with this, and similarly, like we said last time, we divide the values by 255, and like similar to last time, we just everything else is the same. So we can, the x train and x test remain the same, whereas for y values we create the one hot encoding vectors. Okay, so this is the, I would say, the main part. So we can go step by step and try to understand it. So in TensorFlow, there are 2 ways to create models. So one is called the sequential API, which we like briefly touched upon last time, but we'll go into more depth this time. And if you look at the other one, it's called a functional API. So here you can see there's something like there's a layer and it's being passed as a function for something else. So I would say like we'll look at both in detail. So first sequential. So like the name suggests, sequential is basically one after the other. So first you add a layer and then you add another layer and so on. So it's just one by one, right? So
नवीन ऑडियो चलेगी तेरी
म्यूट तो नहीं होगा नवीन?
नहीं उसको माइक का इशू है ना शायद कॉल करना पड़ेगा
नवीन हेलो
लगा कॉल कर.
You are not audible, Naveen. Hello.
बोल दिया मैंने उसे.
am I audible now?
Yeah,
हाँ,
you are audible.
Arianos.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. So where did the connection?
First line model equals to sequential.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I was just saying that. So what we do is, so sequential is a class in TensorFlow, and you can create an instance of the class. So initially we create an empty model with the name model, and then what we do is in a sequential API, what we do is we add layers one by one. So it's just one after the other. So it's very simple, and there's a function called add, and you can pass in the layer inside it. Okay. So the first layer is con2D. So we looked at convolution layers. So I'll just tell you what each argument means, and then we'll just go back and look at the image. So con2D, and then so this 64 is the number of filters, right? And 3 cross 3 means the shape of the filter, and activation function is something which we mentioned last time, and input shape is the shape of the image. So let's just go to the image. So in this case, so this is the input 96 by 96, and 3 by 3 is the kernel size, and so you can see this 32 here. So this 32 is the number of kernels. Okay. So anyone who didn't understand this, because this is little crucial, right? This is the main part in a CNN. Okay. So you can interrupt me if you don't understand it. So what we're doing is we're basically telling, we're saying to the model, add a convolutional layer which has 64 filters, each of 3 cross 3 size, and the input would be the shape of the input would be 32 by 32 by 3. This is what we're going to say. And then, so this is one layer which is added. And then what we do is we next add the max pooling layer. So the max pooling layer is also something which we saw last time. So this is something like this. And in this we can give the, so this red box is the size of the pooling. And then what we can do is we can say it's max pooling. So this takes the max value. And so max pooling is also done. And similarly, con2D again, with this time with 32 filters and the same kernel size. And here we are not mentioning the input size because there is a previous layer which is already existing in the model. So what TensorFlow does is it is intelligent to find the input shape directly if there is an existing previous layer. But in this case, since this was the first layer, TensorFlow cannot obviously find out the shape because it doesn't know what image you're going to pass. So in the first layer, if it is a convolutional layer, we'd have to give the input shape, but otherwise you can skip giving the input shape. And similarly, we are also giving the max pooling 2D again, and with the same size. And so these two are like pairs, similar. And then what we do after this is once we are done with max pooling, we flatten it. So if you remember flatten, so we did this last time as well. So it just makes the matrix as a vector. So 6, 6, 4, 4 would become 6, 6, 4, and 4, just like a single vector. So why do we do this? Because then we put the dense layer. So what we do is first we initially flatten it, and then dense layer is also something which we told last time. So dense layer is like it has connections to all other neurons from every value in this, from every node in this layer. There would be a weight and a weight and bias associated with 256 nodes. And next comes the dropout. So dropout is something which I think we are seeing for the first time here. So let me explain a bit about it. So dropout, what happens is this is usually used to prevent overfitting. So what happens is that sometimes it happens that there is too much of info, and then so what we do is we randomly say that. So we're telling TensorFlow that we are randomly turning off the weights of certain nodes. So like what will
नवीन
happen? Yeah.
थोड़ा सा font size increase कर ले एक बार.
अच्छा अच्छा ठीक है, एक मिनट. दिख रही है अब? ठीक है,
हाँ better है पहले से.
ठीक है. So in dropout, what we are saying is, so the dropout is a probability value. It's like a value between 0 and 1. And what it does is it says that I want a certain fraction of the nodes to be turned off. And this is decided randomly during training. And this is not really important for now. If you want, you can go through it again when you are learning on your own, or I'll explain it in the end as well. So once this is done, we have a dense layer, again another dense layer, with this time with 128 nodes, and then finally we would be having 10 nodes, a dense layer with 10 nodes, since we have 10 as a number of classes. And if you observe, as similar to last time, all other layers have a ReLU activation function, whereas the last one is a softmax. And this is because when you use a softmax, all of the 10 values become probabilities, and then you can easily choose which value is the maximum. And then there is this function called compile. So in compile, what we do is firstly we can tell what loss TensorFlow should use and what optimizer the model should use, and what metrics should be displayed during the training. Right. So for classification problem, we always use a categorical cross entropy, and usually almost always like the optimizer is Adam, but you can explore some other ones like SMG prop and all. So there is also this function called summary, where you can take a layer by layer look of how we added it. So you can see there's a con 2D, and it starts with the con 2D, and then there's a max pooling, and there's a max pooling here, and for each layer it tells you what are the number of trainable parameters. So usually you can see that the trainable parameters are something which a network can learn during the training phase. And for some layers there is no trainable parameters, because for in max pooling 2D you just pick up the maximum, so there's nothing you can train there. So this is up till this is the explanation of how you create a model, a CNN. So does anyone have any doubts in this? Like anything, like you can- did you understand everything? Okay, params, great, great. Okay, so for example, let us say, so when you're applying a con 2D layer, you are saying that I want to learn 64 filters, each of 3
I
cross
think
3.
there is a doubt.
Yeah. That's what I'm explaining. Yeah. So as I was saying, so there are some layers where the model can learn some features from the image, right? And there are some layers where there is no learning, and it's just like a process that should be followed. So if you see in a con 2D layer, what happens is you're saying the model that I want to learn 64 filters, each of 3 cross 3. So what you're basically saying is, in this layer, once you're from this to this, in between there are, so the model learns the 64 matrices, each of 3 cross 3 shape. So that is how the trainable parameters come into play. So could you understand that? Okay. Okay, what is the use of one hot encoding? Okay, so if you see, like usually what happens is you cannot give a computer values like this, right? And so what we do is, and like it's, I think there's also one more reason to it, is that instead of making it a single shape vector, we have a matrix. And usually if you look at the inner computations of a neural network, you can see that there will be a lot of matrix computations. So I think I'm not exactly sure, but I think this would help in that. So when you one hot encode it, you can easily consider this as a matrix, and you can find out many things. So that is why one hot encoding is done. Uh, Activation function are related to filter. Uh, Not really. Like, so filters are the filters are something that the model learns, right? Let me show you that picture again. So this 3 cross 3 matrix is just called a filter, and activation function is more about what function you're going to use at every node. So you can, it's not really related, I would say. Yeah, Vinayak. So I think the see, the data set is very huge, so you can't push it on GitHub. But as I said, you can use this function to directly load the data from TensorFlow. It's less hassle free also. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like Rishabh says. So it's basically, if you have any categorical data. Yeah. Okay. I think all the doubts have been answered. I'll proceed further. Okay. So I hope you got a kind of an idea what this is, and so you know, so once this is done, you have finished instantiating your model. and then now what you have to do is the next part is just the training part. So I'll just run this. So it's a simple function where you say model dot fit, and you're giving x train as the x values and y train as the y values, and epochs is just consider it as 10 iterations, but it's not really as simple as an iteration. So after each epoch, the model improves its performance. So you can think of it like that. And we'll just let it train for some time. So while it trains, you can ask any doubts you have. Anyone? Any doubts? Like, because it would take some time to train. Okay, yeah, sure. So, Rohan, so what we are doing here is we are saying, so a con 2D, you can assume it as a set of this many filters, right? So, and what is a filter? A filter is like a matrix of this a given size. So you can assume that this layer, what it does is it tries to learn different types of matrices, such that you got an understanding of a filter, right? So what we are trying to do is we are trying to learn certain matrices which can so these would be used as a filter or a kernel, whichever way you'd want to pronounce it. So what they would do is it would help you in extracting information from the image. Let's say, for example, one filter which it learned was to sharpen the image. So maybe what would happen is, like, maybe there are some parts in the image that would get highlighted if that particular filter is learned. So that is how a convolutional layer works. So Rohan, did you get a basic idea of it?
सर आपको पिक्चर एक बार दो मैट्रिक्स का
अच्छा अच्छा, ठीक है, ये हाँ
हम सर जैसे इसमें हम 3x3 का फिल्टर लिए
हाँ
तो ये 32 ऊपर की तरफ क्यों बढ़ा, जैसे ये 32 क्या है?
एक्चुअली वो ऐसा है, देख, तो मैं ये बताऊंगा। देख, तेरे पास एक इमेज है 96x96 के साथ, ठीक है, और मान लो तुमने एक यहाँ पे एक कॉन्वोल्यूशनल 2D लेयर लगा लिया। ओके, सो सॉरी, आई एम स्पीकिंग इन हिंदी। सो लेट्स अज्यूम दैट वी हैव यूज्ड अ कॉन्वोल्यूशन लेयर which is 3 cross which has 32 filters, each of 3 cross 3 size. So what that means is, first, let's say you have chosen some filter randomly. You first apply a convolution. So what would happen? You would get a an image which is size n out cross n out, right? So, like, this part, did you get why the height and width is 94 cross 94?
यस वो हो गया
Yeah.
नीचे वाले फार्मूला से।
Yeah. So now what you're doing is, since there are 32 filters, first you apply the convolution with one filter and then put the layer here, and then you use the second filter and apply the convolution again. So you will get 94 cross 94 again. So you stack that. So you can maybe probably visualize this better with this. So what you do is, you first find out convolution with one kernel and put it here, and then you find out the convolution with the second kernel and then stack it behind this, and so on, and repeat the process for how many ever filters you have. So in this case, we are saying that we have 32 filters. So what I would do is, I'll take one filter, compute it, so it would become 94 cross 94 image. I'll put it here and then repeat the process for second one, stack it here. So you understood how 32 is coming. So this 32 is the volume, like consider it
सर
like
जैसे हम
the
लोग 3x3 का पार्ट बाय पार्ट आगे जाते जाते वो
हाँ
पूरा इमेज के ऊपर एक ही बार एक फिल्टर अप्लाई कर देंगे।
ऐसा ऐसा ये देखिए। तो मतलब ये मान लो तुम्हारे पास 96 क्रॉस 9।
यस सर ये जैसे
हाँ
समझ गए
तो
सर।
हाँ ऐसा एक तो ये क्या होगा कि तुमने एक कॉन्वोल्यूशन निकाल दिया ऐसे एक फिल्टर के साथ और ये यहाँ पे आएगा और एक और फिल्टर
इसके ऊपर
तुमने
फिर हम
ले
लोग
लिया
स्टैक करते चले जाएंगे।
इस पे स्टैक करते चलेंगे बस
यस
ऐसे।
सर डन सर।
Okay. So I think that should have cleared that out. So again, so like I was saying, in this case we use 64 and 32. So like you can use any number of filters. So and depending on the filter size, number of filters, your volume will increase based on that. Right. So okay. So I think any more doubts? Yeah. Like Jan says, so why we use a CNN is to help extract features. So we don't know what features are important. So we ask the CNN to find out what is important, right? Okay. So now the training is done. So I have done a training for 10 epochs, and so on the train data set, it has an accuracy of 82%. So let's see how it performs on the test data set. Great. So on the test data set, it has an proper accuracy of about 70%, which is still decent given that this has 80%, so still has a decent amount, right? And so did everyone understand this? Like, so what we're doing is we first train the model on the training data set, and then we check to see how the model is performing on data it did not see. So if the model already knows a particular thing, then it can obviously predict the correct answer most of the times. But once the object a model did not see, we want to see how the model is able to generalize to data which it didn't see until now. So in this case, I would say it's a quite okay model. It still has 70% accuracy on test data. And yeah, so this again, I just plotted a random image, so you can see a bird, and then what we're trying to do is we are going to see what prediction the model is giving in this case. So the model says it is 2, and if you look at this, so it is a bird. So consider this as 0 and this as 1 and so on. Then you can see that the model is predicting that it's a bird. So if I just tried it for some other case, so I'm not sure what this is. Okay. Yeah, so this seems to be like a deer, and the model is predicting 4, so which is again a deer. So in this case, like both the predictions are correct. So okay, what can we interpret from accuracy approach? So what we can say is that model has learned features in such a way that it is able to, out of the 100% training data that the model has seen, it has learned features in such a way that it is able to predict 80% of those correctly, and 20% of those, even though it has seen, it has not been able to find out features such that it can predict those correctly. So that's what you can say for training data accuracy. And for testing data, it's pretty much same. Like the model has not seen any of the image, but it is predicting out of 100% of the data, it's able to predict 70% of those right. And it like there are cases where the accuracy could probably be increased, but in this case, yeah, it is a good model, you would say. Yeah. So this is the part of inference. So there are basically three phases to any model. So it's like so this is the model initialization, and this is the model training, and this is the model inference, and model testing and model inference. So I mean, pretty much in testing and inference is the same, I would say. So this concludes the sequential API. And so what happened is, so okay, before I proceed for this, like, do anyone have any doubts regarding anything until now? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Okay. Okay. So let's just look at sequential modeling. So in sequential, we saw that so there's like a model, and then you keep on adding one layer, one after the other, right? So and so what happened was, uh, later on, as people started using sequential model, they observed that there is a kind of a flaw if supposing, let's say, with the same data, you wanted two predictions. Supposing you wanted to predict two different values, or let's say you wanted to try out, like, let's say, supposing this was your initial model structure, right? With one input layer, two hidden layers, and directly the output. Okay. And then you wanted to also know what is the output if, let's say, instead of putting the output directly here, I add another layer in between this and this, and I want to know what is the output for this case as well. So in a sequential model, what would you do? You would first create a model for this, and then you would create an entire model for this, including inputs again, hidden layer two times, and then a branch layer. So a functional API, what it does is it tries to minimize the computations that have already been done before. So the training until this part remains common among both of them. So what functional API does is it provides a way for us to use the common part of two different models, and you can directly use the create models in such a way that no computation is done twice. So this is the idea of a functional API. So any doubt in the idea itself? If anyone didn't understand the idea, yeah, then go ahead.
So like in this model, in this functional model,
Yeah.
like when it propagates to learn
Yeah.
the values,
Yeah.
since it is parallel connection, like
Yeah.
both of these things will affect the common stuff, right? The common part.
Sorry, so you're saying that so, like, what it does is, like, okay, I get what you're saying. Like, see, but the point you're not getting is that in the end the outputs, like, so the expected outputs are the same, right? So did you get what I'm saying? So, like, the outputs in this case and this case, they the truth values would be the remain the same. In a classification problem, like, the truth values of the data set would remain the same, but when you're training, you just, so this would not affect the first few layers in any manner. So additionally, it would only affect, like, so the only difference would be that when you're adding a hidden layer here, the weight should change here. It would not change here. You get what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'll just see how functional API is also used. So in a functional API, each layer is called as a function to the previous layer, just similar to how a function is called. So, but the first layer, as always, would remain a first layer. So it would not be a function of any other layer. So this is the independent variable, you could say, in terms of functions. So what we do is we first create a layer called input with the same shape again. So the 32 cross 32 cross 3. And then for each layer, what we do is we first write the name of the layer similar to how we did in the sequential model. So if you look at this and this, so let me just, okay, I'll show it like this and then probably you would get the idea. Yeah, yeah. So, so do this. Yeah. Okay, so if you can see, there are definitely parallels between both of them. So you can see in the first case here, it's called sequential, whereas this is just an input. And in the corresponding cases, what we do is we can see the inside part is exactly the same, right? And just that, what we do is instead of doing the model dot add, we don't have a model here, not yet at least. So what we do is we pass input layer into X. So X here, you can assume it's like a intermediary. So what we do is you're saying, I want a convolutional layer which takes this as an input. So which takes inputs from here. And similarly, what you're doing here, you're adding a max pooling after convolution. So in this case, what it would be, so X is the output from convolution, and the output from convolution goes into the input of max pooling. So that is the how you can interpret the functional API. So and the rest you could say like it's similar. Like so the X here would then go here and then would go here, and that's how it works basically. And so in this case, what I'm trying to do is I'm following the same structure until 128 here, right? And then what I want to do is one output would be the same. So until 128, both are the same. And here what I do is in output one, I'm just directly putting the output layer with 10 neurons. And then what I do, I create another branch layer here, and I say I take this X and put it into this branch layer, and this time it's going to have 64. So this is the branch hidden layer. So if you know what I'm saying, this is X. One X is directly going to output, and the branch hidden layer which I'm creating here, it is it is having 64 neurons, and then it takes X into this. So now what is the advantage? I don't need to write layers separately for this model, because I have the train already pre-trained ones, like not pre-trained, like already common part outputs from here. So I take the output from there, and then this I pass it into the second out. So uh, any uh, uh, doubts until now? Yeah, exactly. You can have a direct cyclic graph as long as the network does not form a cycle. So why is it a problem if it forms a cycle? If can anyone guess the answer? Anyone?
Like the output and input are just connected like with each other. So once output will be the input
Yeah,
again it gets processed again.
exactly. So the output of some layer is possibly dependent on itself because it's forming a cycle. So it's simple. Yeah. So as long as you don't form a cycle, you can branch it anywhere, everywhere you want, and you can branch it from here again, and you can again do it. So, so did everyone get the structure of the net we are trying to create here? So, any doubts in that?
Just to clarify a little bit more about the use case of functional API. So, many times we just don't, we not only want the class, we not only want to create the class, but we also want to, if you guys have heard about it, there is also something called as object detection, where we try to put some bounding boxes around some images, and then we classify that image as like whether it's a person or cat or whatnot. So in those cases, actually using functional API is used there. So like whenever you have two different kind of outputs, for example, one head does the regression for you and the other head does the classification task for you.
So you're basically trying to minimize the redundant task. Okay, so no doubts at least until now. Okay, so I'll continue ahead. I'll close this. So I'll just run this. And then what I'm doing is, so in a functional API, so what you do is you finally create a model with a particular name. And then what you do is you say what are the inputs as a, you can give a list here as well. And then what are the outputs? So you can, you're saying that I have basically one input layer, which is this, and then I have two outputs. So the model would give you the outputs of both the cases. So that is how model works. Then similar to that, so in when it comes to this, so you can even give different optimizers for each one. So let's say like you have loss, so this is just so you can give one loss to a certain function and another loss to another. Accuracy too, you can do the same thing. So similar to the previous one, you can see that. So in this, so you can finally probably understand this better. So it's saying for each layer, it gives the same thing as it shows before. And this time it also says it's connected to what layer. So this layer is connected to input one, whereas this layer is connected to con2d underscore 2, which is this, and so on. So that is the summary. And so like if you know the logic, like it's similar. So you can have X train here and then Y train. In this case, I'm just giving I'm just using functional API to for classification in both cases. But as Nipun said, you can say, suppose you want to suppose you're predicting house prices. You can use one branch of the network to compute the prices and other the branch to classify the price into bins. So I'm not sure if you really understood that, but you can look more about it and you can see how functional API is useful. Okay, so any doubts in the meantime? I don't think so, because
Like only advantage is like simplicity.
yeah,
That's it.
simplicity,
Yeah.
and then maybe there is some overhead in memory, maybe.
I don't know. That's like I
It
don't
would
think
be
that will
very
be very good.
trivial. Yeah, it would be very trivial. Yeah, exactly. So functional is something that is always more like interpretable, at least, because
Usually
you
beginners
know.
start with sequential actually. I mean,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
they usually find sequential to be easier to learn.
yeah. Like sequential is easy because you're just stacking one layer behind another, and whereas functional is once you know once you're like more comfortable with TensorFlow, you can use functional, and then you have more freedom basically in functional API. Okay, so I think this part would take really long time, so I'll just cut the story start and show you what the outputs are. So like you can use the same way to evaluate a function, and in the same case, like you can give the X test and you can give the expected output for each branch of the neural network, and then it says that like in this case there's not much of a difference. Also, there's like 67.8% for one branch and 67.4 for another branch. But like as Nipun said, and this can be used for different type of tasks. So you could get like a proper value here and a probability value here, and vice versa. And lastly, there is one very important topic which we think that you should cover, but it would it would not be possible for us to cover in the short time. So there is a topic called transfer learning, and usually what happens is you these tasks, you know, they're very computer intensive, so you need to have GPUs, and it's not practically possible to train networks on your own if the data is very large, or if your network is very huge. You'll run out of memory. And so what people usually do is they use something called as pre-trained models. So pre-trained models are something, so Google and other big companies like Facebook and all that, they have huge data centers with lot of like heavy duty GPUs and so on. So they have a lot of memory associated with them. And you would have probably heard of distributed computing. So they use multiple GPUs and they train models like that on a huge data sets. And then what they do is they once you train a model, you can save it as a file. Okay, so you can save all the weights of the model, and you can do that using TensorFlow. So what they do is they train the model there on in huge data centers, and they save the model as a file, a single file, which would be hardly anything, like probably 10-15 MB, and it is freely available to all. So what you can do is, instead of training your own models, you can use a model which is pre-trained, and then what you have to do is, if the task is the same, so for example you find a CIFAR pre-trained model on internet and you also want to do the same task, you can directly use yeah, obviously GPT-3. Yeah. So if you're using for the same task, you don't need to do any changes to the model. You just download the pre-trained model and directly use it for whatever is your use case. But there are cases, right? So let's say, supposing now we are going to give you a problem statement where you have to do something. Let's say, suppose you want to classify images, but you want to classify images of our campus, let's say, and you want to say which hostel is what. You want to classify that. Which hostel has a number what. So in this case, you cannot directly use a CIFAR pre-trained model or any other model. So, but there are some general data sets. For example, there are data sets called, there's this one data set called ImageNet, where there are lots of classes. So what you can do is, you can say the model has some understanding about what different type of objects look like, and what you need to do is, you are using that understanding, and at the same time you're fine tuning it. So you're telling the model that yeah, your understanding is correct, but this is not my use case. My use case is for hostel images. And then you, with minimum memory, you can fine tune the models, and you can make it work for your use case. I think you probably would not have understood what I said, but it's a very popular technique, and you would easily find out how it works. And if you just go on YouTube, or if you just Google about transfer learning, it's quite a simple topic. In fact, I would say to some extent, we also use transfer learning. In humans, there is transfer learning. So I think any more doubts, or else we can conclude the session today.
I think we should move to the problems statement now.
Yeah. Okay then. I think now I think Prajwal can take over, and he can release the problem statement. So,
Yeah, hello. Am I audible?
हेलो प्रज्वल।
हाँ दीपक।
मैं ऐसा बोल रहा था कि एक बार के लिए ना हम थोड़ा वो बता देंगे कि सर्किट काय पे बनाना है और कैसे कैसे इंपोर्ट करनी है फाइल्स।
मैं एक प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट कर लूँ, उसके बाद तुम कर लेना एक्सप्लेन सर्किट को।
हाँ चल ठीक है।
ओके, स्क्रीन विजिबल है मेरी?
हाँ
हाँ
ओके। So yeah, welcome one and all to the problem statement of Vision Arcadia. So basically the problem statement is a two-part problem statement. part 1 of the problem statement involves developing a computer vision model that can recognize hand gestures. For example, stone, paper, scissors, a fist, a thumbs up, and similar gestures. And the second part of the problem statement is automating tasks using these gestures. So for your ease, I have divided these two tasks into subtasks. So coming to the computer vision task, basically it has been divided into 5 tasks. Your task 1 is collecting the data, that would be images in this case, cleaning and standardizing the data, developing an input pipeline, developing and training the model, and testing the model for performance. And coming to the second part of the problem statement, that is automating the tasks using these gestures. You can begin with automating tasks within your computer, like basic tasks like music control, volume control, and a good starting point would be to automating the function keys on your computer, F1, F2, and all those keys. And then later you can expand this knowledge to deploy this model on Raspberry Pi and automate tasks using the microcontroller. So data collection. So I would be providing you with the script to collect your data. To execute the script, as I have said over here, you can simply run the following command: Python collect gesture.py and enter a folder name. So what will happen is your camera will open and you can record your gestures over there, and it will record each and every frame and save it to that folder. Okay. Coming to data cleaning and standardization, it is very important that you make sure that there are no noisy images in your data that could affect learning. So make sure that you avoid dimly lit images or very high contrast images, blurry and shaky images, and images with wrong gestures. Another good step is to make sure that all the images have same dimensions, and preferably the training dimension, and that same dimension should be preferably your training dimension to save the time down the line. This is important because you would be working in teams and each gesture would be recorded by different members and each camera would have different resolution. So make sure that you standardize these images before passing to the model. So some tips while collecting the data. Try to collect each gesture from multiple different angles across different backgrounds, different people, to induce a sense of generalization across your data. You need to make sure, once again, like as I have mentioned earlier, blurry and shaky images and images captured in very low light or high contrast situations. Also, make sure that you try to collect your images in a sense that you would be using them in your use case. So if your use case is detecting the gesture halfway across your room, it is not a very wise choice to collect these images while sitting in front of your computer. So make sure that your training set reflects what your practical use case is. And last but not the least, most of the convolutional neural networks that we use work in the range of dimensions from 48 cross 48 to 256 cross 256. So try modifying the data collection script to standardize the image sizes while they are being collected according to your model that you choose. Next up is the input pipeline. So basically input pipeline is nothing but a TensorFlow utility that manages the creation of batches and the shuffling of image data sets, and that eases the inputs to the model. So you can go to this link that I have put in the slides and you can easily see over here how we design an input pipeline for image data sets in multiple ways. You feel free to explore this. This is a very important part of ML ops, that is like the commercial aspect of machine learning and deep learning, developing proper input pipelines. So next up, the next part of your problem would be developing, training and the testing of the model. So identify the task at hand before you begin developing a model. Is my task a classification task? Do I wish to implement some kind of object detection model to crop out my hand out of the image and then perform recognition on it? Be very clear what your task is. Now you can train your model in one of the two ways, and Naveen has explained it in a very clear manner. You can either train the model from scratch using the functional API or the sequential API, or you can use transfer learning. And for transfer learning, also once again, there are very well documented blogs on the TensorFlow website and also by independent authors, and you can refer those. And last but not the least, make sure you develop proper methods to test your model, that is splitting your model into training and validation and testing sets, and looking carefully for training curves, and also looking for bias and variance in your model. So the second part of our problem statement is automation. So I would recommend you should begin by automating basic tasks in your computer, like as I said earlier, music control, Windows tab switch, and controlling your function keys like sleeping, fan control, brightness, and keyboard backlight, etc. Once you get the hang of basic automation using your model, you can try deploying the same model to automate some tasks using Raspberry Pi. So the important part of this problem is that it is a very, very open-ended problem, and feel free to innovate. Like a heavy emphasis has been laid on how well you can innovate over here. What innovative task can you automate using your model, and what utility can it bring to our everyday lives? Yeah. Okay. So this is not a. I will now share you some evaluation focus areas. This is not an exhaustive list, nor this is the sole parameters on which your model will be evaluated. There are many more parameters, but these are some things that you should keep in your mind while developing your submission. So first of all, it is the quality of a collected data. So the number of gestures you are able to provide to us, like a person who collects 15 different gestures compared to 5 different gestures would be favored. And are you able to introduce some kind of innovative augmentations over there? Like you collected, say I collected 1,000 images as a scissor in the stone paper scissors game. Now am I reflecting those? Am I flipping those? Am I like adjusting brightness, zooming and adjusting it to handle all the practical use cases? So that would be also seen. Next up would be a model quality. How innovative is my model architecture? Did I directly copy some famous architecture without understanding anything about it? Did I try some innovative loss function in my model? Is my model giving a good accuracy over the testing set or the validation set? Are my model loss scores good? So these would also be considered. And last but not the least, the most important part, as I mentioned earlier, is innovation and automation. Did I innovate something very, very innovative? Did I automate something that brings great utility to my everyday life? So as I mentioned earlier, this is a very open-ended problem, and you can feel free to explore it in any direction you like. So that's all from my side. Coming to the submission template, we will share the submission template with you once the challenge officially begins. So you can wait for it. Most probably it would be in form of a GitHub repository. So any questions? I hope the problem statement is clear. I would be sharing this slide with you guys on Discord, and I will also be sharing the script to collect the data by yourselves. So yeah, if anybody has any doubt, please feel free to ping me on Discord, either openly or send me a DM on Discord. I will be very happy to clear all your doubts. So yeah, that's all from the problem statement side. Hope to see you participate in large numbers and develop very innovative solutions. Thank you very much. Deepak? Hello?
Hello, Deepak Shah sir, continue कर लीजिए आप.
Thanks to Programming Club to have a wonderful sessions on CNN implementations and problem statement reading. Now I'm going to give you the short introduction on how to make the circuit on FitJing. So let me share my screen. Everyone, my screen is visible? Hello?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, this is the FitJing software in which we can make the circuit. For that, the link is here in the description, and you can download the FitJing software from there. Anurag, just share the link. Okay, you can access this software from this drive, and we have the stocks also, and just you can download it from here. And after installing the FitJing software, you will get something interface. Okay, the starting interface will be like this. And what you have to do, you have to go in the breadboard, and you have to import the Raspberry Pi over here. How to import the Raspberry Pi? If you click here, then you'll get the import. You have to click on import, and from drive you have already downloaded the Raspberry Pi. Then you have to click our Raspberry Pi, open, and it can be imported. As I have already imported the Raspberry Pi, so it is not being imported right now. And after importing, what you have to do, you have to you'll find your Raspberry Pi, which stuffs you have imported, you can find it here. Now what you have to take Raspberry Pi from here, and after having the Raspberry Pi, we can connect any of the stuffs over here. So for example, first of all, I am connecting the servo motor. Okay. And this is so interesting. Just you can make any of the circuit diagram in this FitJing software. So let's learn something over here. What you have to do, you have to find the ground pins. Which are the ground pin? In, I think this third number pin is the ground pin. You can connect it over here, and for this, and you can connect other pins like this, okay? And you can change the color by just clicking the right, by pressing the right click, and you can change color to the red, black, whatever you want, okay? And now, sorry. Suppose again you have to change, if you have to change the wire of color of this wire, then you can change it from here, okay? So this is the small circuit diagram for the servo motor. In this way we can connect any other stops like LED. Let me connect an LED to you. Just you can delete your stuff from here, and if we have to connect the LED, then just put your LED to the breadboard. And as we have discussed earlier, we have to connect the resistor, okay? And one thing in mind, if you have to rotate this resistor, then you can rotate it from here. You can give the 90-degree rotation and just connect it to here. And we have to connect the resistor in the negative terminal, and then what we can do, just we can connect the negative terminal of the Raspberry Pi, the ground terminal of the Raspberry Pi, like that, okay? And you can change the color again, wire color to black as it is ground. And you can connect any of the digital pins to the positive terminal of the Raspberry Pi, to the GPIO pin of the Raspberry Pi. Again, you can change the color to red, okay? So this is the circuit diagram for your LED, as we have discussed this earlier in the previous sessions also. And now we are going to connect our Bluetooth model with the Raspberry Pi. For that, we are again going to delete our stuffs over here, and you can delete it. Suppose, and now you have to okay, here is the Bluetooth module. And how to connect the Bluetooth module with the Raspberry Pi? As we have discussed earlier in previous session, there was some RX and TX pin in this board, Raspberry Pi board. Then what we have to do? We have to just rotate it by giving 90-degree rotation. Then there are total 6 pin, but the state pin and key pin is not used here, okay? What you have to do, you have to connect the VCC with the VCC positive terminal of the Raspberry Pi, and ground with the ground. Let me connect. I'm not able to recall which are the ground pin here, is not written. So I am connecting randomly, okay? Because I am not able to get which pin is over here, okay? Suppose this is the VCC pin, okay? I have connected it to it, and you have to connect the ground pin to the ground, and you can change the color like that. Sorry, black, okay? And you have to keep one thing in mind. The transmission TX should be connected to RX, and RX should be connected to TX, okay? So I think here 4 or 5 number was the okay, here is written, okay? This is the RX pin, okay? And we have to connect TX over here. So the TX should be connected to, what was this? Okay, RX wire color, let me change this to blue, and the RX should be connected to TX. Let me change the color to yellow, okay? So this is the normal connection for the Bluetooth module. In this way, there are lots of stuffs available over here. You can use capacitor, resistor, display, all the things. If you do not have Raspberry Pi in your home, then you can try circuit making from here. And to make a robot, the first thing is that the circuit making, then is programming. If you know this both stuff, then you can easily starting making your first project. Then by the advancement, you can make bigger projects. For that, what you have to do, you have to start with the LED blinking. Just do the LED blinking project in the circuit, in the fridging, then just do the advanced level project. And if you are comfortable in that, then you can do the project in real by just buying the Raspberry Pi and do your project over there. Thank you. Now I am stopping sharing. Okay. This was the short introduction on how to make the circuit. Do you have any question regarding this? Anyone? Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Was it too fast? Oh, sorry. If you have any problem, then just I can solve it. Anyone have any problem in circuit making? I think the participants are very hungry. They just went to eat food. We do not have any question till now, but when we'll use to ask in Discord. Deepak, can you share the Discord link for the discussion of doubt?
Yeah, they have Discord link.
Okay, okay. Okay then. It's all from our side. Anurag, stop.